Hello and welcome to Angular Air. On this week's episode, we are having a fireside chat between myself and Steve Sanderson from Microsoft. Steve, why don't you give an introduction to yourself?
Hey, everybody. So my name is Steve Sanderson, and Jeff is right. I do work for Microsoft. I'm on the ASPNET team. I did use a lot of Microsoft technologies in my prior web development work before that. So that's kind of how I got into the company. And I am working on trying to make ASPNET a good platform for client-side application developers.
So today we're going to talk with Steve about .NET, which he works a lot on, and specifically how .NET is being integrated with Angular 2, or how you can use Angular 2 with .NET. So Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing in that area?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so ASPNET has always been a server-side platform, and that continues to be the case today. And the team, as in Microsoft, is very strongly focused on making it incredibly robust and performant on the server, and that's all great. But as of course we all know, more and more of the web development world is moving on to the client. So we need to try and bridge that gap a little bit and make sure that developers can be really successful in that area. And that can be a challenge because there's so much really even knows what the right thing to do is, and even if you do, then 2 months later it'll have changed by now. So we're just trying as much as we can to try and provide some clear guidance for people, to provide some good tools that people can use to application in terms of server-side stuff integrates well with what's going on the client. So in terms of Angular stuff specifically, we've been following we've been recommending Angular to ASP.NET developers for a long time, for years, Angular 1, obviously. But we've been following Angular 2's development very closely. And as Angular moves to Angular 2, which is a big shift for Angular, at the same time, ASP.NET is moving to two changes are taking place at the same time, and we're trying to enable everyone who gets on board with ASP.NET Core to also be able to get on board with Angular 2, as well as other client-side technologies at the same time.
So I have a lot of questions about the interaction and interplay between the two, but before we actually get into those, one thing I should mention is that you were the original creator of Knockout.js, is that right? Steve?
I think hi.
Oh, sorry, it cut out for a minute.
Oh, sorry. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I did start on Knockout in 2010. And I think that the first version of Knockout came out within a week of the announcement of Backbone. So it's really single page application thing, certainly before I'd heard of Angular. And yeah, it's still going well. We've got a core team of 4 people now, and a very substantial and loyal user base. So yeah, it's a great project.
So what made you guys start to put the focus on Angular, given that you had started to develop Knockout? Do you just see it as 2 different use cases, or what was the decision making there?
Okay, well, to be fair, I'm not saying that there's an exclusive preference for Angular or for any other thing. ASP.NET, as a primarily server-side framework, is going to work with what part of the value that we are trying to bring to people who use ASP.NET is some clarity around how you can get your job done and be successful. And a large part of our customer base are corporations who tend to have large development teams, and they want just really clear resources. They want to be able to go and buy books on whatever technology and training videos everything. And Knockout's really good at doing view library type stuff. It's not an end-to-end system like Angular is. It's not supposed to be. And because it gives them everything they want in one big package. So it's a pretty easy thing to recommend for a lot of our customers, even though it's not an exclusive preference.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. So just to reiterate it back to you, what I'm understanding is that, obviously you guys support many different types of variations of setup and different types of front ends to accommodate your users. And Knockout was never built to be like a full-fledged framework like Angular is on the front end. So it's more a matter of what people need and use and that type of thing. So that makes sense. So for Angular specifically, what are some of the things that you guys have been building into the latest version of ASP.NET to work well with Angular?
Yeah, okay. So we have been, like I said, following the development of Angular 2 as it's gone along, and we've had particular interest in things that we can do to integrate server and client. I think probably the best known thing in that area would be the server-side rendering feature, which is obviously a feature that's unique to Angular 2. It wasn't available in Angular 1. So thanks to you and Patrick with your Angular Universal package. It's really straightforward for somebody writing C# code. You can enable it just with C#. You don't have to understand the fact that it involves Node behind the scenes. We just magically spin up Node instances and deal with the interprocess communication stuff there. We've also tried to make loads of other things work cleanly and straightforward. Webpack, then we've got whenever you request some client-side resource that's built by Webpack, it gets built on demand, and you don't feature, which means that as you change your code, it will just show up in a web browser without you having to reload. We've also done things like if you want to use Angular Universal and the code that boots up your application is written in something like TypeScript, then as long as you point us to the Webpack config, then we can just load and execute that automatically. So we've done tons of things that eliminate the kind of friction points that people would experience most of the time. And yeah, I hope that's going to enable people to get their job done with less messing around than they would otherwise have faced.
So with the inter-process communication that you mentioned, so basically .NET, obviously a server-side language, or server-side technology, and Angular 2 can now render and run on the server, like you said, with Patrick and myself's Angular Universal project. So there is this mechanism for talking between the two. Is that something that you guys built yourselves, or did you use something that was already out there?
No, we built this ourselves, but it's not complex or remarkable. It's just a simple bit of infrastructure that can take invocations from .NET code, and then it will say, well, do I have a running Node instance already? If not, then I'm going to start one up. I'll detect whether the old one has frozen or crashed or something, and if so, I'll clear that away and create a new one. And then I'll connect to some listener that's running inside the Node process to send invocations in, which will in turn execute them in setup. So although the application today is to create a Node process out of process and then use HTTP as a transport between .NET and Node, that's not bring Node in process as well. People have already in the past demonstrated ways of running Node code natively within an actual .NET process without creating new processes, which eliminates the whole inter-process communication thing altogether for even more speed.
And then in addition to, so that's really cool. That allows for essentially .NET to be able to do the server-side rendered view, like when you're serving up pages. For the client side, just the general like IDE-based stuff with Visual Studio, are there additional enhancements that you guys have been working on to work with Angular 2?
Yeah, so I suppose project templates would be one of else. So you've got the desire to write your code through it in TypeScript or CoffeeScript or less or whatever, and you need a build system. And then there's things like server client-side routing configurations, because obviously you've got both if you're building a...
Hey, I'm going to make one suggestion here. Let's because I think your connection's still a little bit off, that we kind of cut in and out. Let's all cut out the video portion of this, and we'll just go like full audio. So turn off your cameras.
Sure.
You want to turn off your camera? All right. Oh, nope. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me?
Okay.
All right.
I can hear you.
Perfect. I think this should help. So let's continue now. So getting back on track, you mentioned the project templates in Visual Studio. Is there anything else? What about in terms of like API integration? Like, because a lot of times when you're building something on the front end, you want to connect to obviously your back end API. So do you have an easy way for like sharing models, anything like that?
We haven't found it necessary to do anything special with that, because ASP.NET has already got a very straightforward but powerful method for doing JSON web services, and that just naturally meshes very cleanly with the stuff that you're doing on the client. So that hasn't really been necessary. The only thing that perhaps fits into that category that we have found it useful to do was to tweak the way that ASP.NET reports validation errors, so that the forms libraries in Angular can natively understand them and display server-side error messages.
Okay, and then
that help.
Sorry, what was that last part?
Hopefully, give people a less annoyed experience.
Okay, and in the .NET world in general, there's a lot of changes happening. We talked about it a little bit before this show started, and I think one of the big things when we talk about Angular integration and kind of expanding the use of .NET into the Angular community is, there's a lot of people who use Node on the back end, or basically just non Windows based systems. So I think one of the bigger changes that's going on now is being able to run .NET on Linux, on a Macs, etc. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, these are in pretty enormous shifts, really. This is the biggest. It's been around since like 2000, 2001 or something like that. So this is a pretty long-lived set of technologies, but they're basically all being rewritten at the moment. So we've the new name for all of this stuff is Core. So we've got .NET Core, which is the core .NET platform, which is completely cross-platform. That's of course, it's available for Windows, for Mac, for Linux. And then we've got ASP.NET Core, which is a completely rewritten version of ASP.NET that runs on top of .NET Core. And that's completely different in the sense that not a lot, if any, of the previous implementation code has come forwards. Like, it's really has been rewritten. We're not shying away from the fact that there are a lot of breaking changes there. It is a kind of a whole new world, really. So we've got a very we've completely broken away from all of S specific underlying APIs. So that's just meant a lot of stuff has been able to clean up as well. We've now got a completely package-driven distribution model. So every time you reference anything, whether that's part of the core.NET framework, whether it's part of ASP.NET, whether it's someone else's package, it's all coming in as packages in a way that would be very familiar to anyone who's worked on Node for a while. So it's looking a lot like a strongly typed and a strongly typed managed code version of Node in some ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's a sort of unification going on here with in the JavaScript community in general, but actually more specifically with Angular and Angular 2 moving to TypeScript, that there is sort of this, I guess, momentum in some areas of the communities to become a little bit more strongly typed, to essentially start coding your front end a little bit more like you've traditionally coded your back end. And like, it's funny to hear you talk about on the other side, right? That on the back end, starting to take some pieces, some best practices from things that are done on the front end.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also kind of interesting that I know that .NET has different languages. You can actually code in C# or F# or Visual Basic. Do they still actually have Visual Basic? They did when.
Yeah, it's there, okay. And people use it.
Okay. But no, but for F# in general, specifically, is that something that you see growing popularity in people doing functional programming within .NET?
That functional programming is the future and all that, but I don't know. I mean, I suppose there are probably more conference talks about that than there was before, but I can't say that I know anyone who just writes a regular web application and prefers F# rather than C#. I'm sure there are some, but yeah, I would be just making it up if I said that.
Well, maybe it's just that they're louder, right? That like usually the functional programming people are super adamant, right, and passionate about what they do, whereas I think a lot of maybe even corporate developers, whatever, there's tons of people that do C#, but they don't have to necessarily scream to the world about it.
Sure, and also remember that C# and in recent years it's taken on a lot of functional programming concepts of its own. So although it's not as functional as F# is, it does allow for that sort of a programming style in a lot of cases. You can just do nice big. So I'm not saying it has all the benefits of F#. It certainly doesn't, but it satisfies a lot of people's needs. C# is very successful as a language, unlike most languages. I mean, I know that's only an anecdotal point, but it does seem that people are very happy with it. I certainly have been happy with it. Big teams use it and get their work done very effectively. I think that's one of the strongest things that we've got in the whole .NET ecosystem is C# as a language, and for me that's probably the strongest draw of using .NET as a server-side framework, because I do love Node, and I use Node for as much stuff as I use .NET for, perhaps even more, but I do see that C# has been an enormous strength.
For sure. I think that the sentiment that I gather from just in general developers is that they might not use .NET themselves, but the people that have had experience with C# all see that it is a very good, well constructed language. Anders Helsberg, who's the creator, definitely did a great job. There's a lot of respect. A lot of things that other people have learned in other languages from what has been done in C#. Probably the only thing that's been the detraction of it is the fact that it's only up until now something that you can do on Windows. That's probably was the biggest gripe, I think. So actually that speaks to my next question, which is talking about Microsoft in general. It's kind of funny that 5 years ago, I think it was, something like that, when I think in the Ballmer days, Microsoft was really viewed as kind of this old, stodgy company that really wasn't doing too much innovation and stuff. And it's been such a change, to this point now, where not only with the stuff that you're specifically working on, with a lot of changes in .NET. I mean, opening .NET up to outside Windows is huge. But there's so many different projects that are becoming really popular. RxJS, reactive programming, huge, right? TypeScript, huge. Can you talk a little bit about the cultural shifts that have been going on within Microsoft the past 5 years?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's even been that long. I think Satya has only been in place for probably less than 3 years. I don't know the exact number, but it's something like that. And yeah, it has been pretty surprising, really. I'm kind of shocked sometimes by how fearlessly we now seem to ship products that are just trying to be the best products they can. And it sounds like, of course, you would always make products the best you can, but that's not really the case, because I mean, historically we were trying to produce this sort of overall system of mutually benefiting products that would bring everybody into our ecosystem, or at least that was how I read it. But that doesn't really seem to be the case so much. Nowadays, we just ship whatever people want wherever they want it, even if competitors could benefit from that at the same time. For example, we have Office on
It cut out for a minute. What was the last thing you said?
I was mentioning that we have Office on iOS and Android. Did you get that bit?
Oh, no, I didn't hear that. Okay. Yep.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I was just citing some examples that have been surprising in the past, because they potentially benefit competing technologies. We're benefiting iOS and Android by putting Office on them. We're potentially benefiting Linux by supporting it on Azure and by integrating it even into Windows. You've seen the news about Ubuntu in Windows. Yeah, we're potentially benefiting people on whatever other platform by having VS Code as a free code editing tool. And yeah, sometimes I see things.
I think that VS Code was a great product that you guys launched. I've used Visual Studio in the past when I was doing .NET stuff, but it's always been very heavyweight IDE, and Visual Studio, VS Code being more like a Sublime lightweight editor. It just works really well, especially when you're just doing Angular, TypeScript type stuff, and not needing to do a lot of the more heavy-duty back-end analysis that is in something like the full Visual Studio.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been using VS Code as my preferred code editor for 6 months or so, and I've been pretty happy with it. Yeah.
So what do you think is the ideal setup? So somebody's starting a project today, wants to use Angular. Is it something where, obviously using your something along the lines of the .NET Angular 2 integration that you've set up, is it something where you see in that scenario people would just use .NET as the API and that's it, or that you see that .NET serves a purpose to do a lot of still web-based stuff, and just kind of half of it, pieces of it basically are Angular? Where's the line drawn basically? Or I know it can be drawn anywhere, but what do you think is the ideal in your mind?
Well, it's a good question, and yeah, as you're hinting there, I think you're kind of getting at, in some ways, a question about what's an ideal architecture for a JavaScript application.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think the answer is, as always, like it depends. In cases where you're building, one of the bits of advice that I tend to do like this is for stuff that's private, like it's behind some application, an app, something where you've got a bunch of UI elements that you move between and forms and lists and all that sort of thing. And that's just classic territory for a single page application. And in that case, the more what you're doing resembles that, the more you will probably want to write all of your UI code as client-side code. On web services behind the scenes, which, ASP.NET is very good at helping you implement. But that's not the only type of application people build. There's obviously, it's very common that somebody actually wants to build something that looks and behaves more like a brochure for people to arrive at through searching on a search engine, and just get some basic information, and then maybe just a website for a hotel, for instance. It'd be very questionable, really, to build that completely in Angular, because the benefits you'd get from that would be quite limited, and it would come with some costs in terms of how easily you can make it work well in terms of search engine optimization and so on. I know it can be done, but it's just harder. And then you would probably just want something like the booking section of it to be a single page application style. Or at least that's what I see. What's your view on this?
Well, yeah, it's. I'm glad you asked, because this is one of the things that Patrick and I are starting to formulate in our ngconf talk that's coming up, and I think that depending on your situation, that line can be drawn at different levels. So with Angular Universal, you can have it so that you have a search engine friendly website, for sure. But I still think there are good reasons why you would want to have .NET or some other backend technology serve it up instead, including that you are already have something existing, or it may just, because of the way that you set it up, it may you may have something that performs faster, or whatever it happens to be. The nice thing about the integration between the two that all three of us on this show have been working on is that it's relatively easy to move that line whatever makes sense for your particular use case. So I think that's one thing that's really exciting to me, to be able to have this next generation of technologies be used for publicly facing websites, which is a lot of the stuff that I work on today. So I like the fact that it works really well with .NET, and I actually hope that Angular 2 and Angular Universal will work with other backend technologies in the future. But I know that a lot of .NET developers, or Angular 2 developers use .NET. So I think that the stuff that you built, Steve, will be heavily used once it's all released and out of beta.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's a good point you raised there, that even if you think that primarily you're just serving a client-side application, there's still a option of moving that line. If you just insist on only having static client-side resources, then there's no line for you to move. You're limited in what you can do there.
Yep. So getting near the end of the show, I was curious for the future, looking out to what's up next. What are you going to be working on? What do you think is going to be the next steps for .NET in terms of its relationship with Angular 2, and what you yourself are kind of going to be working on in the next year or so?
Well, I'm focused on just trying to make sure that people are successful in using Angular 2 and ASP.NET together. So I'm interested in making sure that the getting started process is really easy and that you've got a template that just gets you started to you want, and then making sure that when it comes to all of the things that you commonly do in your app development, whether that's like fetching data from a backend or doing authentication or whatever, that we've got very clear documentation and examples and where it's relevant packages that give you a clear way of going forwards. And if we can achieve that, and typical developers who come to the system are being successful, then I'll be very pleased about that. That's kind of all the aspects.
Cool. Let's get to our picks now. Patrick, are you still on? Or did you fall asleep?
Yeah, I'm here.
Do you have any picks for this week?
Yeah, the Angular 2 Webpack 2 starter that I created. Basically, it's an experiment with Webpack 2 and Angular 2.
Cool. What does it do?
Basically, one of the benefits of Webpack 2 is that you get tree shaking, and tree shaking just means that if you don't use a function, then it's not going to be included inside of the bundle. So that's one of the major features that was included in
Oh yeah, that's something like rollup.js does, right?
Yeah, so rollup built in without the restriction of having to only be like ES6 only. So like it works with CommonJS as well.
Cool. How big then is the smallest Hello World Angular 2 if you...
We could talk about that one in 2 weeks.
Yeah, because
okay.
It's and actually I'll mention this just because it's sort of relevant to this discussion and something that Patrick and I were just talking about the other day, is that over the course of the next couple weeks, well, I don't know how long, forget about timelines, sometime soon, there's a couple changes that are going to hit for Angular 2 that are going to dramatically change the file size. So one of them is that they are looking at doing a closure compiler type. I forget what it's called actually, the name of the library, but it's able to just in itself just make more optimize what the final package is going to be, and then they're also going to have the pre-compilation stuff that Tobias has been working on, which will basically allow you, for the during your build step, you would basically build out artifacts that only contain what your code actually uses. And so there's a lot of stuff from core that actually will be able to be ripped out. Like Patrick, isn't like, you won't even have DI running live. Like it's just used during build time.
There's a lot of things. So like pretty much every HTML is going to be precompiled, and CSS is going to be precompiled. And then after that, DI is going to be ripped out at build time. And then the closure compiler stuff, that's one of the best things about GWT that was lost, is being able to statically analyze your code and do better tree shaking and whatnot. So they're going to convert TypeScript into closure, and then take advantage of closure compiler, and then get the bundle size a lot smaller. So everything's going to be it's kind of insane. Just
it's crazy to think some of the stuff that those guys are working on right now, like mad scientists.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Anything else, Patrick, for picks?
For picks, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I pick Angular 2 hot module replacement thing I'm also working on. So just it's Angular 2 HMR module. Basically, hot module replacement is saying that say you have a long list on your website and you scroll to the bottom and you want to change something there, rather than changing something in your editor and seeing a refresh and then having to scroll back down, it's going to bootstrap the application in the browser as opposed to refresh. So it's going to refresh the application in memory, like swapping the code essentially, and that way you don't have to scroll down because it's just going to replace like whatever you have there. So that's one of the benefits, other than it's more speedy like workflow.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick. Steve, do you have any picks for us?
Okay, I'll give you a non-technology, well, it's sort of a bit geeky, but a non-software one then, which is a sci-fi book, which I've been into lately, called Flex. It's part of a trilogy, and it's cool because of the basic concept of it, which is that if people become obsessed about something enough, they derive magic powers over it. And so the book is an exploration of people deriving magic powers over things like software or paperwork or cars or whatever else it is that they're particularly.
That sounds interesting.
Like that.
Cool. Anything else?
Is there anything in my mind right now?
Cool. All right. And on my side, I just wanted to give a heads up for our upcoming shows. Next week, we're talking about web workers with Jason Teplitz from the Google team. And then the week after that, we're doing service workers with Minko Getchev and Gleb Bamatov. And then after that, we basically have a series of NGConf-related shows. So NGConf is going to be huge. Steve, are you going to NGConf?
I don't think I am. Nope. But I've been at the ones in the UK, the Angular event. Oh, I saw you there, in fact.
Oh, yeah, Angular Connect. Yeah.
But no, not NGConf this time around.
Okay. But NGConf is going to be great. We're going to have a pre-show on the 26th, and then obviously NGConf and a recap after that. So definitely watch out for that. For my pick, I just have one pick, and I'll put a link up in the show notes. But basically, I definitely want to recommend Steve's talk on .NET and Angular 2. He gave a great talk. It was like 4, 5, 6 months ago, something like that. That I think really solidifies a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. So I'll put that up there, and you should definitely check it out. All right, that's it for today. Thanks a lot, Steve, for coming by.
Excellent.
We definitely will be talking with you soon. If you want to stay on, actually, after we stop, I think Patrick and I want to talk to you about some Angular Universal stuff some more, because we are, as Patrick and I are going to talk about it, NGConf. We're getting close to the release for Angular Universal as well. So a lot of stuff going on there, a lot of exciting things to talk about.
Excellent.
All right. Everyone have a great week, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, see you guys.